All right, so I'm Kayla Pierce. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. And I'm working on this project with Jessica Collett, understanding ambiguous events. So what we're really interested in is clickbait and cognitive processes and how affect control theory can help us understand this relationship. So I pulled some headlines from some major news sources just this week. So this first one, police arrest three suspects. So this is very straightforward. ABO, police arrest suspects, right? Full information, and they even give you more information there. But we're not always given clear information, right? So another headline reads, 10-month-old shot dead in dad's arms after they're confronted by three men, cops. So here it's unclear, right? We know that an infant has been shot, but were the men cops? There's some kind of confrontation, but we're not sure that these cops/men did the shooting. So it's ambiguous, right? We're not really sure who the actor is. And then here, 9-year-old boy, his mother, and an aunt found dead in Florida. So here the actor is just omitted, right? There's no actor. We don't know who found this family or who killed them, right? And this is one of my favorites. We have a lion and a child. The lion looks pretty hungry, looks ready to pounce, but the only thing the headline says is, don't blink. What happens next is breathtaking, right? So here the behavior is missing, which is encouraging people to click. So what we're interested in is whether or not incomplete information piques or dampens interest. And then when information is missing, whether it's the missing A, B, or O, that's most likely to draw an observer's interest. And then finally, when information is missing, we're interested in how people are filling in the gaps, right? This kind of cognitive process. Okay, so it's easy to see in a quick example how a headline can take on several different forms, right? So you have full information, ABO, police officer attacks elderly man, but it can also be put this way: who police officer attacked? A police officer did this to an elderly man with the missing behavior. Elderly man attacked. Reported attack. Here we don't have an actor or an object. And then this one's probably my favorite. Police officer involved in attack. So we don't know if he's the actor. Yeah, we don't know if he's the actor or the object, right? Yeah, so what we did is we did a survey on Interc. We created headlines and presented them to 500 participants. But I have to warn you that we did have to strip our headlines down a little bit. They're not as alluring as your typical clickbait, and we did that intentionally just based on what we know about the research on headlines, right? But I'll give you some examples here. So this is what a participant would have seen on Interc. Please select a headline that you find most interesting. So we have father shoots dog, elderly woman attacked, and so forth. So they're varying on the different, the 6 structures that I just showed you. And we used these components. So for actors, we used man, woman, mother, father, police officer, and caregiver. Behavior, attacks, kills, stabs, shoots, abandons. And then you can see our objects are weak. Boy, girl, infant, elderly woman, elderly man, and dog. So this ended up generating like 311 different headlines, right? But each participant only saw 7. 2 of the 7 were full information, and we just did that because we had so many full information headlines. We had to get rid of them somehow, right? So here's kind of our first finding. We found that people preferred full information, high deflection headlines. And the chi-square test indicates that this was not an arbitrary difference, even though 2 of the headlines they saw were ABO. Despite that, they still were more likely to click full information than what we would expect by chance. And we also did a conditional logit model and found, or a series of them, and found that people were most likely to select headlines with police officers than they were other actors. And this is not surprising because the data were collected last summer. So, yeah. So because of that, I'm going to focus a lot on police officers in this presentation today, try to help me narrow down my time. So we asked them to select a headline, and then we said, why did you select this headline? And we got open-ended answers. And so what we've done with this so far is we did a sentiment analysis of the words of what they said for this answer, right? And so we used the Harvard General Inquiry Dictionary, and it tagged all of the words according to whether it was a positive outlook word or a negative outlook word, and then we created a polarity scale. So like a negative one would be they only use negative words, a positive one means that they only use positive words, and a 0 means that they use neither or both equally, right? And we did the same thing with fear and joy using the WordNet dictionary. So this is what we found. Okay, so for actors, caregivers prompted the most positive language, which is pretty surprising considering we had mothers in there, but they thought the mothers were just crazy. Objects, infants prompted the most negative language and also evoked the most fear, the most fearful language. So just briefly, I want to show you these models. These are compared to headlines with missing behavior, right? So you can see kills, stabs, and abandoned. They were significantly more likely to produce negative language and fearful language compared to headlines with no behavior at all. And so there's a lot of emotion going on here. I've always been interested in paths of deflection reduction. So another thing we did is we returned to the headlines they did not select. And with the full information headlines, we presented the headline again, and then we asked, what do you think happened? Okay. So for this headline, a police officer attacks infants. This person says it must be a trick, like the infant was actually a pit bull puppy. So we recoded that for a redefinition of the object. Another person said the officer was psychologically disturbed. So here we coded for a modification of the actor. And this headline, police officer abandons elderly man. This person says, I assume the police officer helped the man and then left to pursue the attacker. He didn't abandon him, he helped him, right? So that was a redefinition of behavior. And then we see maybe the elderly man was being abusive to the police. So here they modified the object. And at the identity conference, I saw Elizabeth Loving give a presentation on that had a lot to do with sequencing and some of her work. And so when we heard that presentation, we were like, that's exactly what's happening in our data. So we also coded for sequencing. So here, the elderly man was being abusive. It's clear that they thought he asked for it, right? There was a preceding event, so we coded for sequencing here. Okay. Oh, and I should also mention, I don't have any examples here, but we also coded for instances when they just ignored or dropped the actor or behavior. So, for example, in one headline, it was something like, father shoots girl. And some of the answers were like, the gun just went off. Right? Nobody shot the gun. The gun just went off. So they ignored, in that situation, the actor and the object, and we coded for that too. So here's what we find. If they were going to do something to the actor, the behavior, or the object, they were more likely to do something to the actor and likely to modify it. They didn't drop behaviors usually, but you can kind of see the distribution there. And if the redefinition went heavier in the behavior, but really they leaned to redefining or modifying or dropping the actor or object. Okay, I'm trying not to overload you with a bunch of numbers here, but if we run some models, you can see that it was difficult for them to modify and redefine police officer. That was just a really strong identity. They were reducing deflection other ways because that identity was more difficult. And also you can see mothers significant. They didn't like redefining mothers, especially compared to men. Okay, and then with the sequencing strategy, people were most likely to sequence with police officers, abuses, and dogs. I guess dogs are unpredictable, so they use sequencing strategies the most with those elements. So here, police officer abuses dog. So they said when asked why, it could have been misbehaving, and the cop abused the dog by mistreating him. Police officer attacks girl. She was resisting arrest, right? She did something to ask for this. Police officer kills elderly man. So they said the elderly man had a weapon of some sort and was coming towards the police officer. So preceding events. Okay, so then we return to the other headlines that they originally saw and asked them to fill in the gaps, right? So for the headline, as an example, who a police officer shot, we would ask, who do you think this was done to? And so some sample answers, a criminal, a black guy, a gunman, a minority. A police officer did this to a girl. What do you think was done? Rescued her. He gave her balloons. People are creative. Right? Made her apologize. But some of them were high deflection, like, I think you raped her. Right? Infant attacked. We said, who do you think did this? A babysitter, a step-parent. And then a police officer involved in stabbing. For this structure, we just asked what happened. And then we noted whether or not they put the actor or the identity into the actor or object position. Okay, and so we did get some demographics, and we collected data for political affiliation. So this was something that was interesting that we found so far. So if the police officer was the actor, the way they filled in the objects changed based on political affiliation, such that liberals imagined objects that were more good or nicer than conservatives, right? And this is not surprising. But what's so strange is that moderates imagined objects that were the least good. So go figure, right? So we have liberals, conservatives, and then moderates. That was the pattern that emerged. So if any of you have thoughts on that, I would love to know what you're thinking, because I was pretty puzzled. Okay, and so I know most of you are familiar with MTurk. We had a pretty typical sample with MTurk. There were more men than women, mostly whites, around the age of 35. They were more highly educated, and they leaned left politically. 38% of them were parents. So in conclusion, people did prefer the high deflection, full information headlines, which makes us really wonder if clickbait, as you and I probably know it and see it, those are actually, that's actually a strategy used for low deflection information, right? They're trying to get us more interested by taking the behavior out, anticipating high deflection. I'm not sure, but yeah. So, for what we found, they actually preferred full information. People were most likely to redefine or modify an actor and not the behavior and object, although some actors were more difficult than others to redefine, particularly police officers. And then political views influenced how people filled in the gaps, particularly with police officers. So I think that's all I have for you. Thank you.